Launched last year, V&A Innovate is one of the V&A's flagship national schools programmes, aiming to support, celebrate and advocate for design and creative education across the country. Grounded in the museum's world-leading collections, exhibition, research and cutting-edge industry practice, V&A Innovate was created with teachers and designers to equip young people at Key Stage 3 with the confidence and skills to develop solutions for real-world issues, encouraging collaboration and critical thinking, and introducing them to core design principles used in industry. The programme includes an online resource hub, an annual National Schools Challenge, professional development programme for teachers, and annual awards for schools, teachers and young people. Next slide, please. The awards aspect of the programme is really important. We want to use our platform to celebrate the teaching profession. Here's our Teacher of the Year award winner from 2019, Stephanie Sweeney from Darwin Aldridge Community Academy, with her award and her brilliant team of winning students. We asked teachers to nominate other teachers for the award to celebrate their colleagues' commitment to delivering inspiring, innovative, exciting creative projects with their students. Can we, through a programme like V&A Innovate, find ways to further support teachers' professional development and to raise the status and prestige of their profession? Research from OECD shows that creating conditions for teachers to catch one another's thinking and lead their own professional development through practice sharing, peer learning, observation and so forth is one of the core aspects of strengthening teacher professionalism. Can a programme like V&A Innovate provide a forum and space to learn together, using our world-leading collections and wide-reaching industry links as inspiration? Our V&A Innovate online talk series is a starting point for that, providing teachers with a chance to hear from a range of designers, makers, artists and education specialists who can provide insights into current thinking and research. We are also running regular open office hour sessions as a chance to come together with the V&A Innovate team and other teachers to discuss your V&A Innovate projects in an informal online environment. Next slide, please. This quote is from Alex Beard's book, Natural Born Learners, and it's now more true than ever. We know in the current climate, we need to think anew, do better, care more, and teachers are making that happen. So for all the teachers watching, thank you for all that you do. I'll round up my introduction with a quote from a 2018 OECD report on teachers as lifelong learners. These days, education is no longer just about teaching students something, but about helping them develop a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through an increasingly complex, volatile and uncertain world. Today's teachers need to help students think for themselves and work with others, and to develop identity, agency and purpose. It is with this thinking in mind that we wanted to invite today's brilliant speaker. Professor Dame Alison Peacock is the CEO of the Chartered College of Teaching. Prior to becoming CEO, Alison was Executive Head Teacher at the Wroxham School in Hertfordshire. Her career to date has spanned primary, secondary and advisory roles. In 2018, she became an Honorary Fellow of Queen's College, Cambridge, one of the first ever female fellows admitted. She's also a member of the Royal Society's Education Committee and a visiting professor of both the University of Hertfordshire and Glendear University. So with no further ado, over to you, Alison.
Thank you so very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here this evening, thinking about how we can empower our teachers to embrace innovation. And I'm going to talk to you about the research that I've done, Learning Without Limits, about time that I've spent as a teacher throughout my whole career, but also the time that I'm now devoting to developing a new professional body for all teachers, the Chartered College of Teaching. If I could have the first slide, please. So my research, I mentioned in my opening address about the notion of learning without limits. What does this mean? Well, it literally means what it says on the tin. How do we make sure that in our schools we don't limit the capacity to learn for our young people. But it also means, how do we make sure that we don't limit the opportunities our teachers have to truly engage and embrace the opportunity for every youngster to really flourish? If I could have the next slide, please. So this slide here, transforming learning capacity. If we're able to transform learning capacity as teachers, then essentially our job becomes the most important job there is in the world. Because as a teacher, if we are able to unlock, if we are able to constantly be focusing on what might be possible, the art of the possible for every learner within our classrooms, within our schools, then suddenly, as I say, the job becomes all important. And what our research has found is that teachers have the capacity to either limit learning or to enable it. Because if we're not careful and we follow too many strict rules of compliance, then we believe and we get into a situation where we think we can track what every child is capable of, that we can somehow graph their future capacity to learn. And actually, when we lift those limits, when we refuse to label children, when we allow children to surprise us in each of those domains, in all areas of their learning, then suddenly we're in a totally different position. If I give you an example, when I joined the school where I was head teacher, when I joined that school, it was the school in special measures. Kind of all hope had been lost in that school, and the teachers were all trying desperately. They were working incredibly hard, and they were trying desperately to do what they were told. There were constant visits from the local authority, constant visits from HMI, and they were trying to do what they were told the whole time. And of course, once you get into that kind of treadmill, it's very difficult to break beyond it. But I became the head teacher there, and I'd only been in the school a couple of weeks, and a parent came to see me, and she said to me, "Mrs. Peacock, this school thinks my daughter is stupid." And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, this school thinks my daughter is stupid. She's in year 4 and she's on the table that is in the bottom set, and you know, the teacher doesn't believe she can do anything." And I went to visit the classroom after this parent had been to see me. And when I went into the classroom, the little girl, Rebecca, was sitting at a table, and there was a label on her table. All the tables had labels, they were in groups, and the label on her table showed that she was indeed in the bottom set, because her group in English were called the full stops, i.e. you're not going anywhere. Now that teacher was the only teacher that I actually needed to move on, and she did move on after a couple of months, and the new teacher who came into the school was Simon Putman, who subsequently has become a head teacher. He works in Barnet, and he's one of those wonderful teachers who can inspire you, who is a wonderful poet but also a sportsman, who could build models, but also, you know, he was just one of those teachers that was just good at the whole curriculum. And Rebecca was in his class for 2 years, and he refused to label children. If we can have the next slide, we can see what happened to Rebecca, because this is Rebecca. 2 years in Simon's classroom, having been in the bottom set. When it came to it, she did her SATs at the end of year 6. She achieved well. She went on to secondary school, and here she is as Young Engineer of the Year at Imperial College London. A huge achievement for anybody, but you know, the difference that a school can make, the difference that a teacher can make when they believe in the art of the possible, when they believe that someone like Rebecca has the capacity to surprise us, and that she shouldn't just be stuck in the bottom set and given the work that the bottom set can only do, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we can have the next slide, please. This is very much about how do we shift the culture? How do we shift our thinking as teachers away from believing that everything is stuck and nothing can change? How do we move from that to the notion of the art of the possible, where children can surprise us and anything feels within our reach? If I could have the next slide, please. So as a leader coming into that school, I knew that that school was stuck. That school was a school that had been labelled as a failing school. And I'd never been a head teacher before, and I didn't have a script to follow. And I certainly wasn't taught what to do when I went to a leadership course, the NPQH. I didn't learn how to lead a school out of difficulty. And the accepted norm of the time, which isn't that much different now, was that what you do when a school is in difficulty is you tell everybody else how they ought to behave. You tell everybody what they need to do. Now that the room for innovation becomes incredibly, well, almost non-existent in that kind of circumstance. But my instincts going into that school were that what was needed was not for people to feel that they had to be told what to do for every minute of the day, because it was taking us nowhere. I needed to liberate that school. And so I started to talk to the children and to the staff and to the governors and to the parents about how this was going to become a listening school. And we were going to listen to the youngsters, and we were going to listen to the teachers and to the parents. That sense of agency, co-agency, when everybody's working together, takes you to a place whereby amazing things can start to happen. And that was the leadership that I deployed at that time. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So an example of being a listening school was very much, in practical terms, we set up a school radio, for example. There was a big pack that arrived in school that was all about how do you teach speaking and listening. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, the number of hours that we would need to go through in our staff meetings to follow all this guidance about how to increase the amount of speaking and listening in our school. I've got an idea about speaking and listening. Let's create a radio station. And we did this. We set up a radio station right next to where the dining room was. So it was adjacent to the dining room. And the children would broadcast, they would play music and they would provide commentary and they would do sports reports and they would tell the news. And it was a real reason to listen. It was a reason to engage, but it was also a purposeful way of starting to use talk in a very meaningful manner. But it was also an innovation. And if you've read any of the work or heard me speak before, you will know that the leadership of that school was all about innovation. It wasn't about doing what everybody else was doing. It wasn't about blaming the teachers. It wasn't about labeling the children and saying in a deficit manner and saying, we know that you're not capable of very much. It was saying, what could we achieve if we all work together? What might we achieve to lift limits on learning? What might happen in this school if we genuinely believed that anything was possible? And that kind of magic that starts to happen when you create those kinds of messages for the school, you kind of get a sort of you can almost touch it, that sort of feeling of anything can happen here. So one of the things that happened when I first arrived was the school was incredibly dull, really, in the sense that there was no display anywhere because they'd been told don't put displays up because when the inspectors come in, you want them all to be fresh for when they're going to arrive. So there were no displays anywhere. And at the time, my sister, who's an artist, had been doing some work with willow, and she had been making great big creatures, fantasy creatures out of willow and tissue paper. And I said, Jenny, can you come and stay with me? And can we make some of these great big fantasy creatures? And can we hang them all around the school? And so she came and spent a couple of days working with our children in Year 6. Now, this was in the spring term, as the children were going to be doing their SATs in the summer term. We did this in the mornings. So this was art in the mornings, in the term before SATs, in a school in special measures. Now, you can either call that courageous or reckless. I don't know which one you want to choose, but the reality was that what started to happen was life started to come back to the school. Not only was there life in terms of, oh my goodness, we're doing something, it's really fun. And look how amazing these creatures look. But also the building suddenly sort of almost took off as if the building had wings, just like those creatures that we were creating. Next slide, please. As we moved on, we started to realise how important it was to learn together, to learn collectively. And the picture you have in front of you here is a picture of a Celtic hut that we built in our school grounds that was big enough for 30 children to sit inside, where you could sit round in a circle with a fire pit. And when you went inside, the temperature was different, the smell was different. You couldn't hear road traffic anymore. You were in that space. And that became the space where children, the eldest children in the school, told the younger ones the Celtic myths that they had learnt off by heart. So storytelling and remembering mythology and then passing that on. The Year 6 children became the keepers of the myths and passing that on to the Year 5s who were going to become Year 6s. All these kinds of traditions and things that happen in schools are really, really powerful, and they build a sense of agency. If I can have the next slide, please. So in this instance, I'd only been at the school a little while and we hadn't got any money because the school was in special measures, a bit like now, there was no money going round, and I knew I wanted to provide interesting resources for the school. And so the way to do that, well, I went to car boot sales. And this here is an example of a time when I saw some Victorian bottles in a box, and they were all caked in mud, and the box had been left in someone's garage for years. And I brought this box of filthy bottles into school, and I gave them to the Year 2 teacher, and I said, "You're doing Victorians, aren't you? You're studying the Victorians. These bottles are Victorian bottles. Just think what you could do if the children could become archaeologists. I haven't touched any of these. I don't know. In fact, some of the bottles, 2 of them actually had liquid in them, but nobody opened them, nobody drank it, nobody died." But that whole kind of sense of what might we find? What might the writing say on the glass? What might these bottles have been used for? And we knew where they'd been found. So the children were able to genuinely behave as if they were archaeologists. That kind of electric excitement relating to a rigorous development of curriculum, these are the kinds of things that raise standards. And very quickly, the school, well, in the first year was in the top 100 most improved schools, and then subsequently became outstanding, and the standards were, incredibly high. So this is not something that I'm just making up and saying, oh, well, if you're not doing very well as a school, you might as well enjoy yourself. This is about how do you have a real purpose? How do you build innovation that actually leads to excellence? If I can have the next slide, please. So trust is really key. It's really important that children know that they can trust each other, that they're not going to be ridiculed, that the teacher trusts them, and that they can trust you. So trust is a reciprocal notion that is really powerful, and it's one of the key ethics of learning without limits. And this photograph here is a photograph of a child. Yes, he's wearing goggles, but he's using real spray paint to engage in graffiti, because we got some graffiti artists who came into the school, and we did a whole study around graffiti as an art form, which then I'll when we get a little later into this talk, I'll just show you why that paid off. If I can have the next slide. This is about everybody. It's not about the convenient majority. It's about every single child as an individual, and it's about how do you find a way through. And the best way of finding a way through for every child to learn is to be able to take a creative approach to leadership and to teaching, and to learn from each other and to work together. Now, I'm going to share a photograph with you in a moment of a drawing that a child did when she came to us. Her parents came to see me. The school was full by this time. We were oversubscribed, and they said, "Mrs. Peacock, we would really like our daughter to come to your school. We didn't choose your school for our other children, but this particular youngster, she has special needs, and we want her to come to your school because we hear you've got a good reputation with special needs." And I remember thinking, oh no, because they started talking about the fact she was going to need a padded room, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with this? Anyway, she came into school, she joined the reception class. She'd never been in any formal education before. She joined in, but she refused to do any kind of mark making. So no kind of big paints, tiny weeny pens, no swirling in the shaving foam, no swirling in the paint, nothing, until she drew this. Next slide, please. This is her first drawing, and this is in the February. And you will know that this cannot have been the first drawing that this child ever did, but it was the first drawing that she showed us. So all of this time when she hasn't been lifting a pen, when she hasn't been forming her letters, when she hasn't been engaging in any kinds of written activity at all, she was able to do it. But she needed to get to the point where she was willing to show us what she could do. If I could have the next slide, please. This is her in year 1, and she's got a whole page of writing next to this, and this is Mary as a superhero. Next slide, please. This is Mary later on in her career. You can see she has a tremendous artistic talent. She was a child who's very much an individual, and her parents at the time saying to me, can she come to your school because the school where her brothers and sisters went wouldn't be right for her. If she'd gone to that school, I happen to know, she would have been forced in the first week of her time in reception to pick up a pencil and form a letter, because that's what you did in the first week, and the teacher would build up a profile of the work that you were doing. And Mary would not have done that. Had she been asked to do that, we probably would have needed that padded room that her parents warned us about. Next slide, please. So as we learned about learning without limits and we researched what was going on in the school, we realised that there were some dispositions that were vital to enabling the success across the whole curriculum. And the first of these around the affective domain. So persistence and stability are really important. And at this time during COVID, emotional stability for our youngsters is a vital part of what we need to be doing. We can't ignore the fact that they've been hugely impacted by what's gone on. Equally, of course, our teachers have as well. And this particular slide is a child who, when she came into our school, was under the table, refused to come out from under the table, had very, very low self-esteem, didn't believe that she was capable of anything. And yet look at her here. She composed this photograph. She became a dancer, a singer. She sang a solo in the Year 6 production at the end of the year. A real sense of emerging agency. The next slide, please. The social dispositions matter hugely as well. Are we able to offer generosity and empathy that enables our youngsters to try new things? There's a kind of trendy thing at the moment in schools where we say, oh, it's good to make mistakes. Actually, it's horrible to make mistakes, isn't it? We don't like making mistakes. Adults don't like making mistakes. On the other hand, being in a position where you're encouraged to constantly try new things and to empathise with others and not to be ranked one against another means that you can be increasingly creative. And this is what started to happen in the school very quickly, really, really quickly, actually. The leadership of the school that said, I believe in you, meant that suddenly there was almost a kind of collective flourishing. I was there to sort of be the shield between the school and the inspectorate. And yet, actually, when the inspectors started to come into the school, they began to see all of this flourishing. And the first thing they saw were all those birds hanging from the ceiling and thinking, my goodness, what's happened here? Something completely different, a kind of different atmosphere. We can move on, please, to the next slide. And then in the intellectual domain, which, of course, too often is the most privileged domain, an idea of how do we create a culture of openness where questioning is really valued, where inventiveness is at the heart. This particular photograph is a photograph from a mill, a flour mill near the school, where the children went, the Year 6s went, and they worked with the curators and they said, we would love it. Could we possibly come and lead your museum for a day? Could we become the curators? Could we lead the museum and have our Year 1 children coming in and we teach them? And the curators worked with them, and the children designed a series of like a sort of circus carousel of activities, whereby when the Year 1 children came back, they were creating music to the rhythm of the mill, or they were baking bread, but including things like chocolate drops in the loaves, or they were out in the herb garden doing the story of the little red hen, or they were digging for Roman artifacts, which were real Roman artifacts, by the way, but they weren't the Roman artifacts that were in the cases in the museum. These were trays and trays of broken pottery that were in the store case at the back, and the children said, can we bury some of the Roman things so that the children can find them? And they did. So that notion of a collective sort of the adults at the museum, the teachers, the parents who came with their Year 1 children, and the Year 6s leading the learning, that kind of real sense of co-agency, but also the amount that they learned about how the museum worked and why it worked and the technology and everything associated with it became a term-long project. So there's nothing in you can't download a series of lesson plans anywhere about this. This comes from teachers feeling confident enough that they can start to create something new. If I can have the next slide, please. So an example of this would be the music garden that we created outside in the playground. This was built with children bringing in items of metal that we could add to this great big collective. We had musicians involved, we had designers involved, we had artists involved. We had 100 children performing when this was opened, with parents standing in the playground. They were actually standing under umbrellas because it was raining on the evening of open evening, but hey, what's a bit of rain? And so the children were all playing and conducted together to play the music garden. Again, thinking differently, thinking creatively. Once you've got a school that embraces this, then every area of the curriculum feels like anything could be possible to achieve. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. But I also know as a leader that what gave me the courage to do all of this was the fact that I was working with academics. I was working with academics from the University of Cambridge who were documenting the process of school improvement that was completely opposite to the kind of school improvement that is traditional. So traditional school improvement, you will well know, is all about how do you hold people to account. They promise you they're going to achieve X, Y, and Z with their cohort of youngsters. And at the beginning of the year, that feels like it's possible, doesn't it? And then it gets to kind of April time and you're thinking, oh no, what did I say they were going to achieve? So this whole kind of sense of how might we do things differently that nevertheless is absolutely achievable was because we were standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, I had read a lot about young children and how young children learn. I'd read a lot about how do we support and develop teachers in their own learning? How do we build these senses of co-agency, of trusting our teams, of working together? And this is essentially why I've come to the Chartered College, because I believe that instead of being driven by Ofsted outcomes, we ought to be driven by a collective sense of professional learning that is absolutely driven to do the best for every single child. And I believe we build that confidence through expertise. So it's a combination of intuition and knowledge, a very, very powerful combination. Just very quickly, if I could have the next slide, please. Just to say, if you join the Chartered College, this is the only advert in this whole thing, please do join. It's only £3.75 a month, and you get access to all of the journals and research and so on. And also that notion of being part of a collective, tens of thousands of teachers working together to improve pedagogy, a really irresistible, I hope, offer that I hope very much that you will join. We can move to the next slide. So when we had one of our Ofsted inspections, the school had been judged to be outstanding, the team had gone away, we were obviously hugely relieved, and the only thing they'd said in our report was, we think you could do more with your library space. And the building was such that we couldn't extend the building any further. And then we had a staff meeting and people were saying, well, what can we do about the library? And then one person suggested, well, why don't we buy a bus? We could buy a bus and we could park it on the playground and that could become a library space. And so we kind of went, ha, 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 and all the rest of it. And then 2 days later, Roger, who was the deputy at the time, was in the staff room at coffee break, and he brought up on the staff room computer, he went onto eBay, and here was the bus. And he said, look, there's a bus here, we could buy this. But we looked at it, it had been used as a nightclub. We looked at the poll, we thought, nah, this isn't the right one. But then a couple of days later, there was another bus, and it was £2,400. And Roger said, can we buy the bus? And then as a leader, you either make the decision, don't you, that, okay, we can do this, or you shut it all down at that point. Now, I decided, I went and phoned the chair of governors and I said, Andy, can we buy this bus? He said, have we got enough money? I said, well, the Friends Association have raised some money. We want it for the playground. We're not going to go on tour. Can we buy it? He said, yes. And so we bought the bus and it arrived in November. It was pouring with rain. It was a dilapidated bus. The roof was leaking. It stank of diesel. And here it was. This was the container for new books to go onto the playground. And I remember thinking, what have you done, Peacock? You know, this is going to have to be really high quality. But because we had a site manager who was really on board with this, and because the community suddenly could see the possibility of it and the staff were really excited, then we moved to, yes, we can buy this bus, which is exactly what we did. And so we bought the bus. Those graffiti artists I talked to you about, they were the ones who came back and they didn't charge us anything. And they took the children's design for the livery of the bus. They painted the bus. We had parents who came in and sorted out the shelving and everything related to the interior of the bus. We had other parents who came, we put carpet down. We had the radio station moved from indoors to the bus so that it played out onto the playground. Upstairs became a creative space where children could design and build models at lunchtime because they didn't want to be out on the hurly-burly of the playground. So that whole notion of the bus as a sort of symbol of why not is the reason I'm talking to you about it now. And if you like, moving to the Chartered College of Teaching became the equivalent of my double-decker bus in terms of what might be possible if we build a professional body where teachers choose to join us, they come together, they share their practice, they share stories of innovation, they combine with the academic research, they engage in units of study. What would happen? if we could manage to do all of that through joining the Chartered College and building it. So that's why I moved from headship to the Chartered College. I've been there nearly 4 years now. And as I say, if you join us, there will be tens of thousands of teachers alongside you. So we work alongside the subject associations, but really what we're about is about re-empowering, reinvigorating, building the expertise of our teachers and raising the status of our profession. So that's the end of my formal presentation. Thank you very much indeed for listening. And I'm now very happy to take any questions. So thank you very much.
It's fantastic. Thank you, Alison. That was wonderfully inspirational, from conducting a music garden, chocolate drops in loaves, I mean, all of that testimony to the power of creativity and curiosity and courage, actually, in stepping beyond those limits and then manifestly achieving that school improvement piece. Just fantastic. So we're going to open up now to the Q&A. So we've got some moderated questions. I'm going to start with a question from Melanie. Thank you, Melanie. Around differentiation. You know, within this context of learning without limits, how are teachers best equipped to differentiate within a cohort?
Okay, so when I was working at the school, the way that we dealt with that was we offered choice and challenge. We said to the children, there are a range of tasks, as you would, you know, if you would organise, if you were differentiating your classroom into groups, and the children would choose the challenge that they felt most able to do. And what we found from that was that very quickly children showed us they could do much more than we had presupposed they might be able to do. And then more latterly, in latter years, we were looking at this notion of mastery and really working to ensure that we were teaching at a point whereby children were able to practice their understanding and to build their knowledge, and work in talking partners and come back and share their thinking. Particularly worked well in mathematics. In subjects like English, typically you're differentiating by outcome, so you'd provide the same kind of content at the beginning. But then what's really important in all of this, and particularly in the context of this evening's talk, is that there are youngsters who will never necessarily flourish in the sort of traditional subjects, perhaps of maths and English, who nevertheless have wonderful spatial awareness or have wonderful ways of thinking divergently, and you give them enough scope within the broader curriculum, and if you celebrate their successes in the broader curriculum, then suddenly those children have a much greater sense of efficacy and are respected more within the classroom. If you only ever privilege the youngsters who can write beautifully, and this is where I really worry about the latest sort of inspection requirements of neat, tidy books, because I don't think any self-respecting innovator ever worried about whether something was tidy or not. So sometimes I think our metrics are completely skewed against what we need. But being able to really provide a curriculum that offers that breadth means that when you can celebrate the musician or the artist or the dancer or the sportsman or the scientist in the same way that you would celebrate someone who can write an essay, then you've really started to get the broad curriculum that makes a difference for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, colouring outside the lines. In fact, not having any lines anyway.
Yeah, and not colouring in at all, actually.
And not colouring in. No, forget that. I mean, yes, sketchbooks. Looking at designers' sketchbooks in school, you know, as sort of material artifacts for inspiration is sometimes quite helpful for teachers as well as young people to see what that creative process kind of looks like in the flesh. So another question, have you done any more arts integrated projects where you've seen positive effects around whole school culture? For example, less bullying, fewer detentions, fewer pupils missing school, the broader effects?
So many things. I could just give you so many examples. I mean, let me give you an example of a really challenging child that came into our school at the beginning of year 5. He'd been permanently excluded from another school for carrying a knife. He was a looked after child, and the whole creativity that comes into leadership is about, is about so much more than just what does the curriculum offer. So in this particular instance, I just remember his teacher, who was a lovely teacher, actually, a really big kind of rugby playing kind of guy. And he came to see me at the end of the day and he said, I just don't know how I'm going to deal with Charlie, let's call him. I just don't know how I'm going to do it. He's really pushing my buttons. And I remember thinking, okay, I need to worry about this overnight. And the next morning, when I woke up, I'd got an idea. And the idea was I was going to put an advert in. I was going to advertise for a superhero. So I advertised for a superhero in our vacancy bulletin in Hertfordshire County Council. And the person who applied had previously been a teacher, but she had 2 young sons who were autistic, who were both in special school. And she said to me, I would like to think if someone had advertised for a superhero in my boys' schools when they were in mainstream, maybe they would still be there. And she came to join our team, and she learned from this lad very quickly that he really, he was angry about all kinds of things and difficult, but he loved guinea pigs. And so she said to me, can we buy some guinea pigs? So this is kind of the creative response, really, because there's no textbook kind of first look up online what you need to do about the lad who's cruising around the playground trying to hit people. Why don't you buy some guinea pigs? But in this instance, it really made a difference because he became the person who was responsible for the guinea pigs. And so the whole school wanted to go and cuddle these guinea pigs and see them. But of course, they could only go if he would let them. And he was incredibly gentle with these guinea pigs. And so suddenly his whole persona changed from being the angry boy that everybody was frightened of to the one who was showing such kindness to animals. So it's just a tiny example, but it's huge in terms of all the way along in that process, there were other decisions that could have been taken. So, of course, we could have said, no, we can't, if you can't deal with him, teacher, then probably he can't be in this school. We could have said, no, we can't allocate resources to buying more teaching assistant hours. We could have not thought about having a superhero in the first place. We could have said we need a prison officer. So that kind of approach of leadership that tries to understand what might be exciting and irresistible to the children. It's about how you find a way through. So there were loads and loads of examples of projects. So I think for one example being somebody gave us, I don't know why, but they gave us several hundred yellow plastic ducks. And I think they thought we were going to use them for, I don't know, at a fete or something. And we had all these ducks and they were sitting in containers in one of the garages on the site. And as a team, we were like, well, what can we do with these ducks? And then we decided what we could do was we could create duckmobiles. So every child in the school partnered with an older child. So it was mixed age groups and they had their duck and they had a variety of materials and they needed to design and build something for the duck, so that we could have quacky races, as we called it, so that they would be able to race these duckmobiles and the winning duckmobile would win. It's just an example of what would I like to do if I was 7, and also what would you do with loads of ducks? So I think it's about joy. It's about learning should be joyful, and of course, it should be meaningful and purposeful, but it's about how you frame things in a way that means that, that you can do something irresistible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison. And actually, you've given me a really good segue. I know I talked to the team about this earlier in the week, about when would be appropriate to show one of our brilliant personas that we've had developed. And because you were talking about superheroes, so if I may just be so bold, whether you'll be able to see this one, the rock star, the rock star teacher with the superhero cloak. Give me everything you've got to help me teach and learn. At the V&A, we know that teachers are all superheroes. My goodness, never more than the last 6 months, but actually even before that. And even if you can't see your superhero cloaks, all teachers on the session today, and Alison, believe me, you're all wearing those capes. And how. So next question, and I just love this idea of making learning exciting and irresistible. We hope that V&A Innovate is going to be exciting and irresistible for teachers across the country. So thinking now about kind of culture shift and learning without limits, and you spoke about shifting culture from fixed thinking to transformability, never more necessary than now. How do you think teachers can best advocate for creative and more innovative pedagogy within their schools? How can that be done?
Yeah, so I think there's such a continuum here, because the kind of creativity that I'm talking about in terms of leading that school is about a divergent way of thinking. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go and buy double-decker buses and big crates of plastic ducks to enable this to happen. It's about a kind of another way of thinking that allows difference to be celebrated. And I think this is really, really important. And I think it's really important across the teaching profession, because my sense is we have high attrition rates of teachers. And I think this is because when you come into teaching initially, hopefully you're driven by the thought that you're going to make a difference, that you're going to be able to inspire your youngsters, and you're going to enable them to achieve more than they ever thought they could. And if that becomes more difficult than you thought it was going to be, and it's a very difficult job being a teacher, and then if you find that your time is taken up with tasks that you frankly find quite meaningless, such as, I don't know, data drops, or endless marking, or having to have all of the same displays in your classroom as your equivalent teacher across the way, or whatever it might be, then kind of the lifeblood starts to seep away from what it means to be a teacher. And our children and young people respond most effectively to the teachers who they know care about them and who listen to them and respond to them. So if we're too much into compliance mode, if we're too much into being led and being told this is the way that everything has to work, then it stops you actually being able to respond from the heart. And I think those of us as teachers who are free to respond from the heart are the ones who are most likely to stay within teaching, and the ones who are most likely to have the greatest impact. You know, if you can build a music garden and then create a wonderful video online on YouTube, you can look it up, Roxham Music Garden, you know, those kinds of experiences stay with you forever as a teacher as well as a learner, because it makes you feel like anything might be possible. And I think that sense as a teacher is really at the heart of what it means to be a great teacher, because you want your youngsters to be surprised by what they're capable of doing, whether that's through music, dance, drama, art, design, technology, whatever it might be. You want them to be able to achieve more than they think they can. And you as a teacher, similarly, need to be encouraged to be on that journey. And this is one of the things that we're really keen to reignite across the teaching profession, I think, because you are all superheroes. There's no doubt about it. What people have been doing in the last months is absolutely amazing, more than ever.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alison. And actually, just to come back to the point I made in my introduction around the potential for this programme to really develop as a practice sharing, you know, build a community of practice with teachers, a space where we can celebrate your work within the programme and what else that might look like, because we are within the programme, we're constantly innovating, iterating, you know, looking for ways to build and develop the programme and the resources, and whether that's sharing, you know, developing short films that are the kind of testimony to some of this amazing creativity and thinking outside the box that happens. You know, do we really want teachers to absolutely max out on the potential of this free programme to support that professional development piece? So just a quick question, and then I'd like to come Alison, more to the Chartered College of Teaching, their Future of Teaching campaign, but just staying with this piece on professional development for teachers. Can you just share a couple of inspiring examples where you've seen teachers really building and developing these peer networks for sharing and celebrating practice? What have you seen that you think has worked really well?
Well, there's been so much. So as I said to you, when we first started the Chartered College, we decided to produce a journal. And this is a journal with teacher contributions and academic contributions side by side. It's called Impact. And we've heard so many teachers who are quite diffident at the outset, actually, because it's interesting, isn't it? Although teachers spend all their time teaching others, they're very kind of self-effacing about their own learning quite often. But when we've encouraged teachers to write for impact, and then they've seen their work published and it's gone into thousands of schools. So every year when we do a special edition, it goes into 25,000 schools. If you imagine you have an article that's published in that, and suddenly your piece is on the coffee table in the staff room when you go in, that's amazing. And so we've had teachers writing about the practice that they've shared within their own classroom, within across their department, across their schools. We've had teachers talking about performance management in a completely different way. So we've had school leaders who have embraced membership of the Chartered College, and for all their teachers, they've actually encouraged them, instead of setting them objectives related to data points, they've said, we're going to set some objectives related to your professional curiosity and understanding. Think of something that you want to find out about that's going on in your classroom, research it, and then in the summer term we'll have an exhibition and everybody will share their learning. That kind of energy around professional learning is amazing when that happens. And I've certainly visited schools where I've seen that happening, and I've heard about groups of teachers working together to not to observe each other's practice with a view to finding fault, but looking at what's happening through methodology like lesson study to really understand what are the barriers to learning that are taking place that enable, that could be lifted, that might enable a youngster to learn differently. So all of these things now being written about and shared. And then we also, because we offer a chartered teacher program, and now most recently we're recruiting for a chartered leadership program, what we're seeking to do is to change for the good the profession from within. So we're seeking to build the expertise of teachers who can really evidence their practice in the classroom. So this is not about going up into the loft and building a portfolio of things that people have said to you over a number of years and saying, oh, I did that a few weeks ago. This is about actually creating video of examples of practice that are going on in your classroom now, interrogating that, looking at what might be done differently. There are examinations. I mean, this is tough. It's quite a hard process to go through. What we're seeking to do is to really raise the status of what it means to be a chartered professional in the same way that you would if you were a chartered engineer, in order that we can help people to collaborate and to build practice across the piece. So all of this is in train. And the more that teachers write to us about what they're doing and share the practice and share the stories of things that are going on in their schools, the more the energy builds and the more we learn from each other, and the stronger we become, actually, as a group, I think. And we then start to have the opportunity, I really hope, to influence things like the examination system. So you say about, the Future of Teaching campaign. There's a group at the moment that are because of the pandemic, I think, and the enlightenment that has happened through that time, really starting to say, are exams at 16 quite what we need them to be? So we have an event coming up at the Chartered College on the 5th of November with Kenneth Baker, who was the architect of GCSE, starting to say, well, actually, maybe GCSEs, perhaps they're not for everybody. Perhaps this isn't necessarily the solution that we've always assumed that it is, because a third of our youngsters are told they've failed after years and years of being in school when they're 16. They're told, sorry, you're not good enough. So what else could we offer so that we've got that greater sense of appreciation of every young person, alongside the opportunity to really challenge yourself? So this is not about going soft, but I think it is about breadth. It is about core importance of what it means to learn. And I think it's time to have a conversation around that. So that's what we're starting to curate with the Chartered College, really starting to think about the future of education and listening to teachers in that space, as opposed to waiting for politicians to tell us what to do.
Yes. My goodness, what a radical idea.
What would you expect? I mean, you've asked me to come on and talk about innovation. Of course I'm going to be radical.
Absolutely.
But it's only going to be, I mean, this is not about the world according to Alison Peacock. This is about what can our members learn from and with each other, and what are the kind of things that inspire us when we think about what we're going to be teaching next week or the week after. What are the things that make our hearts sing And one of the things that we feel, oh my goodness, have I got to do that again? Because if it feels like drudgery to us as teachers, it's going to be pretty difficult for the young people to want to learn. And this is all about making sure that the process of learning is inspirational and purposeful. And it is rigorous. I hope that no one listening to this thinks that this is some sort of fluffy solution. Because what we showed in that school and what we researched through Learning Without Limits is that when you really challenge young people, they constantly come up with something more. And we haven't mentioned in this piece about children's voice, of course, but that's really fundamental as well. I've been really impressed most recently with some work of some young poets at Oxford Spires Academy, where they're working with Kate Clanchy, who is a teacher poet. And these are youngsters often from refugee communities or from migrant communities who through poetry are able to express some of their deepest emotions. A fantastic teacher makes such a difference and genuinely transforms lives. And this is true across the whole curriculum, but we have to somehow unshackle our profession so that they can really flourish, I think.
Fantastic. What a perfect note to finish your talk on, Alison. So unshackling the profession, taking the limits off what it means to be a teacher, particularly in today's context. But this wonderful piece around inspiration, and we love making learning exciting and irresistible. That's just you're irresistible, Alison. You're irresistible. Your vision is irresistible. It really is, and the joy of putting the joy into teaching from a design perspective. A lot of what you've talked about really speaks to core characteristics of design, putting the user, the learner, at the centre, developing empathy, looking more broadly, openness, curiosity, and then the other poster behind me, persistence is fruitful. My goodness, the tenacity of our teaching profession over the last 6 months is just to be absolutely applauded. So thank you so much, Alison, for your time today. It's been really, really inspiring. I'm going to just use the last few minutes, if I may, just to talk a little bit more about more upcoming talks in the series. But really, we can't thank you enough, Alison, for sparing the time. I know you've got a really busy schedule, but it's been a really inspiring talk. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to join you. Thank you.